And we are very fortunate to have Ray Trentina here. Ray is responsible for the distribution and development of Brandmuscle's service offerings, ensuring they continue to meet the evolving needs of global brands that execute local marketing. So today, for especially, this is a great subject, the state of local marketing. We're going to have a great time today. Please give a round of applause to Ray. Make sure we fill these out today, right? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so we're going to go through a little bit of what some of the data that we've overseen over the last couple of years, and then we've kind of collated, especially for 2016, and looking at local marketing. So this is a report that our company puts out once a year. It's a report that looks at what is working and what's not working in local marketing. We all know in our company, Brandmuscle as a whole, focuses on local marketing and hyper-local marketing. And how do we get to those consumers that are so important to us, and how can we do this with as direct of an effort as possible? So this year we had about 2,100 participants. Last year we had about 1,000, so it went up considerably this year. The year before that it was somewhere around 500 or 750. So what this does is it allows us to get a really good sense with all these data points, 75,000 data points, to understand what people are doing and what's working. And it becomes even more relevant now as you're getting away from some of the traditional media, and so much is based on digital. And there's a lot of data in this, and I apologize, but I'll try to make it as enjoyable as possible. That's possible. So as far as who the responders are, these are the people that actually responded to the survey that we sent out. And we are trying really hard, at least for next year, to get more restaurant responders. But you'll see there tends to be, because these folks are small business owners, tend to be very similar. So you have the mom and pop stores, 0 to 4 employees. We had about 55% of the respondents from there. They have annual sales typically of less than $500,000 and a marketing budget of about 1% of that, or $5,000 or less. When you take a jump to the next group, the small businesses. So this is going to have somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 people. This was 34% of the respondents. So again, the small mom and pop and the medium size or small size business makes up 89% of the responses we've received. These have about $5 million in sales or less and about $10,000 in marketing spend. So they considerably make a lot more money, but don't spend as much on marketing as you'd think. And then we have the medium sized company, which 25 plus employees, 11% of the respondents, and typically sales of 10 million or less, marketing budget of 20,000 or less. So what's interesting about this is basically going to guide what we look at in the next couple slides here. So we asked our respondents, who's responsible for marketing? How many people here are responsible for doing their own marketing? So you can see from this, 45% of the business owners did the marketing themselves. 29%, it was a team effort. So they did it with someone else in the office. 21% had a dedicated person, and only 5% outsourced it. So, and I tend to think that those are the bigger, medium-sized companies that were outsourcing it, because it tends to be expensive. So how are these businesses doing local marketing, and how is it effective? So the next couple of slides I want to take you through. On the far left side is traditional media. That's in blue. If we go to the orange, that is going to be digital, so anything that's not traditional media. If we get into the green, that's social media. And the last one would be like charity and events. So if you look at these slides, basically the areas such as a website, Facebook, direct mail to some extent, these are all very popular methods of reaching the consumer. But you get into some areas like mobile, search engine optimization. People don't quite understand a lot of that, and we're going to get into more of that in just a second here. So I'm just kind of going through some of the main categories, then we're getting into a larger chart that shows some of the breakdown of this. So this now is looking at the difficulty of pulling these off, and this is how the respondents perceived the ease of use or how to do things. So if you look at a category on the far right side, this is the level of difficulty. So the lower the number, the easier it is. But basically 81% of the respondents said this is one of the most difficult things to do, is hosting an event, because it takes outside help usually. It's hard to coordinate. But if you look at something like the Yellow Pages, all the way on the left, it's at a 26, so it's really easy to execute. But what we're going to see is it effective? And I think that's really kind of a main point that we want to look at. So mobile display, search, a term I'm going to refer to a few times, search engine optimization, SEO, that's a big part of it. Again, probably not something you would want to do necessarily on your own, but something that is becoming, it's really easy to do and it's becoming more popular. It's not that expensive. And now we're going to look at the effectiveness. So I'll go back to the example I had earlier where we were talking about the Yellow Pages. And now the effectiveness, this is an index, so 100 is basically the average. That's where you want to be. So anything over 100 is viewed as being effective. So television, it's expensive, but it's very effective. Again, hosting events, it's difficult, but effective. So Yellow Pages, which was viewed as being easy to do, in the previous slide, it's still not very effective though. So you kind of have a trade-off there. So now we're going to take into account this local marketing quadrant. And the way this basically works is we've developed this because it really helps to kind of outline the key areas. So it's a snapshot of usage, effectiveness, and ease of use. And this really helps identify how you can increase through local advertising and what you would want to do, or try to get you to do something for the first time. And then to understand what tactics may be less effective than others. So here is, this is an eye chart, but this is essentially the quadrant. And the size of the dots on here indicate the use. So we talked about that in an earlier slide. So one of the larger slides, or larger dots, is right here. So that means there's a lot of use. The x-axis is the effectiveness. So if it's toward the right, it's perceived as very effective. Toward the left, it's perceived as not very effective. And then the y-axis, the up and down axis, it's easy to implement or it's difficult to implement. So when you take each of these individually, you're able to get a pretty good sense of what things you can do or what things you could try pretty effectively to reach the customer that you're looking at. So we're going to start in the upper right quadrant with the invest or test, as we've called it. And what we're looking at here is these are perceived as effective and easy to implement. So they're a perfect combination of things that you can do, and they're not necessarily really expensive. So a lot of companies do email. That's, as we said earlier, 74% do email. But there's also television ads, again, tend to be expensive. But instant messaging, Instagram, Snapchat, all relatively easy to implement and not very expensive. So these are things that it's not that we're expecting you to spend, when we say invest, it's not to spend a lot of money, it's to try something different. One of the things we're going to talk about in a little bit is an example I have of how someone's using a Facebook page. I mean, a lot of companies use Facebook pages, but they don't use them effectively. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. So in this one, we're moving down to the right-hand side. So right now, these are perceived as very effective, but difficult to implement. And again, local events, large usage, very effective, can be a little bit costly and also hard to implement, as well as hosting events. But things like search engine optimization, paid search, billboards, mobile, all those things are highly effective. They are somewhat difficult to implement individually, but you can do it very cost effectively. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So it's kind of finding your right niche on how to identify those customers and going after them in a way that they'll understand, in a way that you'll really be speaking to them and getting them to come to your restaurant. And these are ones we view as things that need to be reevaluated. So are they effective for what you're trying to do and what you're spending the money on? So far left quadrant, the Yellow Pages, perceived as very ineffective. It's easy, but why would you do it if it's not really paying off in the areas that you want it to? But some of these other things, and we're not saying that, again, that you should abandon them, but look at them a little bit more closely to reevaluate, okay, so what am I doing with Facebook right now, and how can I make it effective? So if 74% of people have a Facebook page, I would guess a huge percentage of those folks set it up and have never touched it since. And that is not going to drive traffic to the site, and you need to be able to have relevant content on there. Very recently, we did a project with a company out out of Cleveland, small restaurant chain that's growing very rapidly, and they did a huge push on Facebook, and we're going to see an ad later on that. But what was interesting is they were going after a young 24 to 35 demographic, but they ended up finding out that a lot of the folks that ended up visiting the site and then subsequently coming into the restaurant were 45 because they were trying to find something that was a good alternative to fast food, but they could bring back to their families. So they found a client base that they didn't think they had. It was very effective, didn't cost much. Twitter is another thing you can do, flyers, LinkedIn, they're all different types of things you need to look at. And again, we're not saying you need to do them all, but just look at them and understand that, are you getting the best return on your investment for these things? And really from there, kind of decide what's your strategy going to be. And then non-traditional and online display, these were things like benches at bus stops and things like that. These are both viewed as less effective and difficult to implement and probably not used hardly at all. So we realize, and we work with these folks day in and day out, that marketing isn't easy for local businesses. So 30% of local businesses don't even have a marketing plan at all. Of those that do have a plan, half are looking at 90 days or less, which in some of the larger companies we look at, it can be 6 months, 8 months, a year ahead, which I'm not saying that you necessarily have to do that. 90 days is the primary concern, 90 days and sooner, but to have some kind of a gauge on what you're looking for, what's coming up next. We do a lot of work with beverage alcohol companies, and they are literally driven by the season. So St. Patrick's Day coming up this week, everything was driven by having St. Patrick's Day things up in the market. Seems relatively easy to understand and relatively straightforward, but a lot of people forget that it comes on that same day every year, and we need to do the advertising to get the push. And everything they do is geared around that. So 40% lack confidence in gauging the return on investment. I can completely understand that. Marketing is always one of those things where if you don't spend the money, will people come in, or is it a result of the product? It's really hard to measure, but there are things that we can do or that you can do to help measure it a little bit better. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in our recommendations area. And only 6% actually outsource to an agency or a vendor. Again, not very surprising. They're very expensive. And for the types of respondents we had, this is kind of what we expected. So this slide is it's traditional media drives local marketing spending. So what you're going to see here is, the blue, orange, different types of things. So traditional media in the blue, orange is going to be digital. And what you'll see is the top number is how many people are doing that, what percent of the market responded that they're doing that, and the bottom number represents how much is being spent. So if I just took those bottom green numbers off the blue, it's about 59% of the spend is still going toward traditional marketing. And it's still very relevant. It's not going to go away. We talk about print all the time. We do a lot of print. It's not going away. It's just changing on how it is going to be effectively marketed. So you'll see there, 76% of respondents had a website. We saw that earlier. The cost, it's only 7% of the marketing budget. So again, very effective if done properly, and very cost effective. So we're going to talk about 5 ways that we kind of see a way that you can effectively, and if you get anything out of this presentation, I hope you do, but if not, these 5 things are probably key, and there's just a few things that you can do to kind of guide your way in 17, and this is where we kind of see some big opportunities. So claim or update your location information on the web. So basically what we're talking about here is there's a lot of data sources out there that pull information in and essentially will kind of drive what pulls up on the website. So things like having your name, your URL, both consistent across any of these things, and there are actual sites listed here. So Info Group, Axiom, New Star Localese, and Factual, you can actually go to these sites and make sure that your information is accurate. And you'll be amazed at, and this is part of what our business does, is look at the effectiveness of digital. You know, if you're on Google and you're doing a search, you know, you don't want to go to the second page. You want to be on that first page. And there's a lot of paid searches, which is not necessary all the time. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but you do want to have consistency. You do want to have the hours of operation, just because that's becomes so important when you're doing a search. If there isn't consistency, you get pushed out. And that whole spaghetti bowl is how the search engines work and pull in the information that's out there. 2, make sure your website is mobile friendly. This is a huge one, and I highlighted location-based mobile searches have increased 34% since 2014. So essentially, you're not marketing towards someone at their house on a computer, you're marketing to someone on their phone. And they want to look up a location real quickly, find out what's around them, and go to that location. So websites that are friendly in terms of mobile capabilities, so if you have a website and it's not mobile friendly, you're being pushed further down in the search engine. So you want to have things that are going to allow you to, bring your site up initially. So what do you do if your website isn't mobile friendly? There are systems out here, WordPress, Joomla, Drupal have plugins so they can make your site friendly. You don't necessarily need to redevelop the site, but again, just making sure that you're able to do this. Or you can create a mobile version of your site. So it's anything that will drive that traffic locally and where they're at that time and place. Use paid ads to grow your presence on social. So again, this is something that you can try doing. What's great about this is it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive if you want to do an ad search. And so search engine optimization is basically making sure that the right buzzwords are in there and the right keywords and information that is relevant to what you're looking for are in that search area. If you're doing a paid search, that's actually where someone's going to go on and click your ad. So you kind of end up, if you do a Google search, you're at the top, and you click that ad and go into it, and you only pay for what you click. But what's great about this is there are, for any kind of budget, you can go on here and create some type of ad that you want to have available. And then it says here, give people who follow you on Facebook a reward for deals, special offers. But again, it's really effective way to go in and say, okay, this is my type of account. These are the types of customers that come in here. These are the people I want to target, and that is going to be a very effective way to go about finding those consumers. Make your traditional marketing work harder. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's still a huge percent of things that are spent on traditional media. 57% of companies still use it. So, newspapers, magazines are getting better at demographic targeting, which is great because then it allows you to find your customers. If you're on TV or radio, always do specific department day parts or programming. So a lot of times it's real cheap to go at 2 in the morning. Don't do it. It's not worth your time. It's worth your time to find a spot, if you can afford it, to get on when you want to get on and when you think you're going to reach that customer. Always negotiate. So when you go to place an ad, they're going to give you a price, and you can almost always negotiate with them for a lower price for that ad. And this is not a plug for our company, but one of the things our company does is place ads for people, and we always negotiate the rate, because even though we place a lot of orders, they're still going to negotiate with someone that's placing 1 or 2 orders a year. And really, what's great about this is now if you're advertising in a local newspaper or a magazine or something, they almost always have a corresponding website. You should be able to get on that as well or negotiate that. Track it. So this goes back to that slide we had about the return on investment is always kind of hard to manage. So what we think is a great way to do this is if you are doing digital, if you can incorporate any part of digital into your plan, there are great tracking devices out there to understand how many people are going to the site, where they're clicking, what they're looking at, where they end up going after that site search. So there's some really great information out there for both search engine and also for social media. Using coupons or coupon codes to track traditional and digital offers, this is another effective way, because obviously you can give different coupon codes to different channels or different consumers that you want to target, see what programs are effective. If you have, buy one thing and get 50% off the second, that's one option you can try, or something that is $3 off it has a little code on there so you can actually track that it got turned in. And then set up a unique phone number via call tracking so you can actually track how many calls are being made in. This one I don't think is quite as relevant, but still can be used effectively. Any questions?
Okay, I've asked this in every single one I've said, and the answers are a little bit different. I am a franchisee and corporate handles my website, and they've made it mobile friendly, they've done other stuff like that, but they don't really allow it for the individuality. So it's basically, if you put in our website, which backslash or our location, takes you to our menu page. And then I think you can navigate from there, but for example, when they were doing this, they're like, send us 10 pictures of your establishment and your customers. I sent them 25 and said, take your pick, and it pulled pictures that they had from, 7 years ago, and we've been in business for 10 years. So a lot of this stuff that, like with the websites and stuff, I really don't have any control over. So my focus now has really turned to social media. And so everybody talks about driving people to your website, but I don't want to drive them to our website. So what do I do?
That's a very good question. And again, and this is not a plug for our company. One of the things that we do very effectively with franchisees is, and we do this in the insurance business, we do it in food service, all over, but basically where the corporate headquarters would have control of most of the site, but then the individual franchisee would have control over certain aspects of that site. And it really proves to be very effective because then you can put your content out there. It's not totally driven, and they give you some very simple tools to be able to manage that. But I think what you're doing at this point, because you don't have the ability to do that, would be exactly where you're going, social and trying to get.
If I can't even put an event up there, I have to send it to the tech person at corporate and pray it gets put on there correctly. I mean, our menu is 2 revisions behind, and I have sent them like on a monthly basis. I was like, can you please put this menu up? It's not correct.
And they don't have a service level that they need to follow in terms of how quickly they get it up?
It's a privately owned family corporation, so no, they do basically what they want to do when they want to do it.
It's a tricky spot, honestly. But I think if you could convince them to give you some control of the site, that's your best bet because so much traffic is driven there. But again, if you can go on, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, going on, making sure that all the information is correct so when someone does a search, or if they pull something up on their phone, you want it to come up that you're nearby. It doesn't matter whether or not the website's updated, but you want them to come up and see that you're close enough to just walk to. Yes?
So as far as all the data that you have here, where did you collect that from? Who was the
So essentially, it's a lot of our clients who are franchisees, and it can be, part of our company does a lot with managing co-op dollars. So we're able to take that information and layer it on top of some of the respondents. And it actually, and I don't know if you were here when I mentioned it, but we have a state of local marketing book that we produce every year that should have been here, but wasn't because of the weather. So, but we can send that to you for sure. And it's both online and it's a hard copy, and it'll talk a little bit more about the data. But it's primarily from, and when we looked at this very early on in the presentation, there were small business owners, medium-sized, mom and pop shops that have 4 employees. So it really runs the gamut in terms of what we were looking at from respondents. It does. Mm-hmm. Yep. Now, ideally, as the number of respondents go up, we're able to get a little bit more local, even in measuring, what's working in Milwaukee versus what's working in New York or something like that. And that's hopefully where we'll get to in the next year or two. But we need that. We need the wide variety of respondents to get that information. Yep.
I have a question. It might speak to what the lady was asking about. What do you say to sort of these online middlemen? And specifically, I'm thinking of single platform and maybe to a lesser degree, Yelp advertising, where they've sort of partnered with the big guys, like single platforms partnered with Google to show the menu cards, and I guess to a lesser degree, Yelp is partnered with Apple Maps. I guess more specifically with single platform might be helpful to help you update your menu and have a more up-to-date thing up there if your franchise partners aren't updating for you. But I've always just kind of looked at it as it's just annoying and frustrating, and it just feels like a little bit of an extortion to pay single platform to update these things when we put so much energy into maintaining our own website, and they're big enough to partner with Google. I would have preferred Google to partner with directly with small business people who wanted to have an up-to-date website. So is there any value to like these online middlemen kind of?
That's a loaded question. So let me do this. I don't have the answer to that, in all honesty, and the person who was supposed to do the presentation may know the answer, he may not, but we have a whole digital team, so I'm happy to get an answer for you and get back to you with. But it's one of those things where we deal with so many of those companies day in and day out with what we're doing for our clients, but I think they can provide it, but I understand the frustration too. There's no doubt about it. If you want to give your information to this guy, we'll get back to you.
Anybody who wants to stay the local marketing guy, feel free to stop by. I've got an Excel document with all your information and we'll have it sent to you.
Or business card or whatever works easier.
How do you feel about any restaurant having their own app? I'm going to do
For ordering purposes?
For ordering, it can be for information. It's something that they can download, so, if you want to do something for the app, so we tell people, hey, download this, we take you, to our Facebook, put events on it,
Here's my only concern with that is that they're going to download it one time, and it's going to end up somewhere else on their phone, and they're not going to use it regularly. And the cost to develop an app can be pretty expensive, and I don't know if that's necessarily the best spend, particularly because I think what you're gaining there is you're getting customers you already have, and you're getting them to repeat the purchase, but you may not necessarily be getting new customers based on that. I hope this was helpful. Thank you all for your time.